usually around Christmas time and have dinner, and they would sort of close it down and we'd have like family dinners.
The year is 2024 and Graceland looks exactly the way the brochures promise. Tour buses idle at the curb while groups spill out into the Memphis heat. Phones already held high, ready to capture the first glimpse. Så vad säger du dagsabbathförin is the Kfirnian in Furry, Winecory die, in a white-columned mansion at the top of the hill. Guides rehearse their lines, ticket scanners chirp at the entrance, and somewhere in the distance a speaker plays a familiar Elvis chorus that makes half the crowd sing along without thinking. For most people, this is the beginning of a dream they have saved for their whole lives. Yet, just a few steps off the path, at the far edge of all that noise and anticipation, a single piece of paper curls on a door that is not on any tour map. The door is plain enough that most visitors never really see it. It does not have a plaque above it or a velvet rope in front of it. It does not lead into the mansion. It faces away from the crowds, toward the pool and the quiet back corner of the property. This is the entrance to the Graceland pool house, a low, almost shy building that sits just far enough from the main house to feel like its own small world. Fans walk past in little rivers, pointing toward the windows of Elvis's bedroom, whispering about the jungle room, already thinking about the meditation garden where he is buried. Almost no one notices the narrow walkway that bends around to this door, and almost no one realizes that for decades, that handle has turned for someone who is not on the tour. For the public, the pool house exists as a rumor. They know the pool because that is where Elvis swam, where family photos were taken, where the water glowed under the lights on hot southern nights. They know the meditation garden because that is where they leave flowers and silent tears. But the small structure beside the water is usually described in passing, if it is mentioned at all. Guides keep the story moving toward the rooms they are allowed to show. The door stays closed, the blinds stay drawn. Guests return to their hotels, convinced they have seen every inch of Elvis Presley's world, without realizing that one part of that world still belongs to someone else. That quiet illusion cracks the moment you notice the paper taped to the pool house door. It is not decorative, and it is not there for tourists. The language on it feels like it has come from another planet. Words like premises, termination, and vacate sit uneasily against the image of Elvis's backyard. There is a date by which the occupant must leave, a contact for questions, a stern line about failure to comply. The name attached to all this is colder than anything inside the mansion's warm wood walls. The tenant is not marked as a cousin, a friend, or a trusted employee. On the document, they are simply John Doe. In a place where almost everything has a story, that anonymity feels strangely loud. The living room has a story. The piano where Elvis sang on his last night has a story. Even the driveway gate with its green musical notes and metal silhouettes has a story. Yet here, in the middle of the most famous home in rock and roll, is a human being reduced to a legal placeholder. No framed photo in the visitor center, no name in the audio tour, just a line in the paperwork and a notice that says it is time to go. If you could flip back through the ledgers that led to this moment, you would see that the story of this tenant stretches far beyond the date on the notice. Somewhere in the records, long before Graceland felt like a polished museum, there are payments logged for the pool house. Month after month, year after year, the same small line appears, quiet as a heartbeat. It suggests a life that has unfolded in the shadow of the mansion for almost half a century. While the estate changed hands, while fans grew older, while the world argued about Elvis's legacy, John Doe was still here, paying rent on a little building by the water. Inside that building, mornings must have started very differently from the way they begin for the tourists outside the gates. Instead of a hotel wake-up call and a shuttle ride, the day might begin with the sound of staff prep in the grounds, the murmur of voices floating faintly from the front lawn, the steady hum of the filtration system keeping the pool clear and blue. The tenant could pull back the blinds an inch and see the top of the mansion through the trees, Watch the first groups file past with headphones on, listening to stories about a man he once might have seen walking across this very yard in the middle of the night. It is hard to imagine that anyone could live here for decades without the past seeping into everything. The pool house looks out onto the water that reflected Elvis's last summers, the path he walked when he came back from tours, the edge of the garden where his grave now lies. To live here is to share a backyard with history and with grief. Every splash in that pool once meant laughter, family, or, in the final years, exhaustion and escape. Every quiet night after 1977 carried the weight of absence. For the person inside the pool house, those memories are not lines in a guidebook. They are the view from the kitchen window. All of this might stay invisible if Graceland remained only a family home, but the modern story of this place is larger and more complicated. In recent years, Elvis's estate has faced legal storms that sound almost too wild to be real. Forged documents, fake loans, attempted foreclosures, and a granddaughter suddenly forced to defend the house she grew up visiting. Lawyers and judges now circle the same property that once held nothing more formal than a handshake agreement between a singer and the people he trusted. In that world, every piece of land matters. Every agreement has to be traced. Every quiet corner, even a pool house, is suddenly back under review. So now there are two ticking clocks at Graceland. One is loud and public. Court dates, headlines, statements from attorneys, a global audience holding its breath in fear that the gates might one day close. The other is small and painfully private. The countdown, printed on a notice taped to a door most visitors still never see. On one side, a legendary estate fights to stay whole. On the other, a single tenant counts the days until he has to pack up his life and step outside Elvis's backyard for the last time. The question hanging in the air is simple and unsettling. How did John Doe earn the right to live here for nearly 50 years? And why did it take until now, in 2024, for someone to finally tell him his time at Graceland is over? To understand how anyone could end up with an eviction notice inside Graceland, you have to rewind to a time when this place was not a landmark, not a brand, not a stop on a guided tour. In the mid-1970s, Graceland is still exactly what Elvis wanted it to be when he bought it. A real home. Cars come and go at odd hours. Friends drift in after shows, dropping onto couches with takeout bags and stories. Relatives visit for weeks at a time and never quite say when they are leaving. The house breathes with the rhythm of a family living under the same roof as a world-famous star who is trying, in his own way, to hang on to something normal. Around the edges of all that noise, there are people whose names do not land in fan magazines, but whose fingerprints are on everything. Groundskeepers walking the fence line before the sun climbs over the trees. Security men standing between curious fans and the front steps. Drivers who know exactly how to get Elvis out of the gate without attracting a crowd. Electricians, handymen, men who can fix a leak in the middle of the night and quietly disappear before anyone wakes up. One of those men, over time, starts spending more nights in a small room at the back of the property than in whatever modest place he used to call home. John Doe does not arrive with a grand introduction. He blends in with the working rhythm of Graceland. Maybe he started as a watchful presence by the gate, then shifted closer to the pool, taking care of the equipment that keeps the water clear and the lights working when Elvis wants to swim at 3 in the morning. Over years, he becomes the person you call when a pipe bursts, when a storm knocks something loose, when a late delivery has to be met at the back drive instead of the front. People in a house like this learn quickly who actually keeps the place running, and John quietly becomes one of those people. Elvis values loyalty in a way that goes far beyond job descriptions. He remembers who showed up when others vanished, who stayed late without being asked, who treated his family with respect when the cameras were not around. On nights when the pressure from shows, money, and expectation becomes too heavy to push aside, he talks to the people who feel safe. That might be a cousin, a bandmate, or a man like John who has seen him tired, seen him irritated, and never tried to sell those moments to anyone. In that private world, promises are not always ink on paper. They are words spoken in kitchens and on porches, over coffee or late-night sandwiches. From John's vantage point, none of those conversations are visible. What he experiences is a subtle change in the air. Staff seem more focused, more distracted by things he cannot see. There are more meetings with outside suits. New badges appear on the lapels of people who walk the grounds while checking things off on tablets. Official cars with unfamiliar logos pull into the service entrances. The mood shifts from steady routine to something watchful and tense. Eventually, the internal debate crystallizes into action. A letter is drafted, reviewed, edited, and approved. It cites dates, clauses, and terms. It balances polite language with firm instructions. It carries the weight of a corporate decision, even if the words look simple on the page. That letter is placed into an envelope bearing a return address tied to the legal and business structure that now shields Graceland from threats. It makes its way through the Santendat, postal system, or an internal courier path and ends up exactly where decades of habit have led it, in the small mailbox outside the door of the pool house at the edge of the property. John finds it waiting there one day, mixed in with the usual small stack of bills and flyers. The envelope feels heavier than it should, the paper inside thick and official. He stands in the doorway that has been his threshold for most of his adult life, holding a decision made by people he may never have met. Inside those folded pages is the next chapter of his story at Graceland, and for the first time, the promise that once felt unshakable is about to be tested by a world that no longer makes decisions with a handshake. When John finally opens the envelope, it is not a surprise so much as a confirmation of something he has felt in his bones for months. The tone around the estate has shifted. More questions, more audits, more people in suits talking about risks and liabilities. Still, seeing the words laid out in neat paragraphs hits differently than any rumor or half-heard conversation. The letter explains that the tenancy is ending, that the estate needs full control of every structure on the property, that he has until a specific date to vacate the pool house he has called home for nearly half a century. It is polite, professional, and utterly final. He reads it twice, not because he does not understand, but because his mind keeps slipping sideways into memory. This doorway is where Elvis once walked past with a towel slung over his shoulder after a late swim. These steps are where Vernon stood while pointing out something that needed fixing in the yard. The language in the letter carries none of that. It speaks only in terms of premises and occupant, as if the life that unfolded here can be reduced to a line in a file. For the first time, John feels the distance between the world he entered as a younger man and the world now making decisions about him. In the days that follow, the familiar rhythm of his life shifts into a quiet countdown. Closets that once held a manageable clutter of jackets, work boots, and shirts become a series of choices. Which things go with him and which belong only to this place. He pulls out old boxes he has not opened in years. Inside are tiny fragments of a life spent in Elvis's orbit, a faded staff badge from the first years of public tours, a program from a memorial event, a key that no longer matches any lock but that he keeps anyway because someone once pressed it into his hand and told him to hang on to it. Each object he touches carries a memory that the estate will never log. He remembers patching a fence minutes before a tour group arrived. He remembers late-night conversations with other staff members when the house was quiet and the world outside seemed very far away. He remembers the first time he heard that Graceland might have to be sold and the relief that washed through the property when the museum idea worked. None of those moments are written into the letter telling him to leave. To the legal system, this is a standard termination. To him, it feels like someone is erasing a story one room at a time. As the move-out date approaches, John finds himself taking longer, slower walks around the grounds. He is not on the official tour path, but his footsteps trace routes he has walked since the 70s. Past the mansion side, where he once saw a very tired Elvis leaning in a doorway, trying to decide whether to go out or stay home. Past the trees that have watched fans line up by the thousands for candlelight vigils. Past the edge of the meditation garden where the Presley family rests together in a place that has become both private grave and public shrine. Every step reminds him that he has lived not just beside history, but inside it. Standing near the pool, he lingers in the stillness that settles over the property when the last visitors leave. He remembers how different it felt when Elvis was still alive, when the water glowed at night and laughter floated across the yard. This pool has reflected so many versions of Graceland. The family home, the grieving house, the struggling estate, the museum finding its footing, the empire defended in court from people who tried to steal it on paper. Through all those changes, his little building watched from the edge. Now the reflection has shifted again. The pool house light will soon be dark. People naturally want a neat answer to the question in the title. Who was living in Elvis's pool house until 2024? The truth is that official records give us less than our curiosity craves. On paper, he is John Doe, a placeholder name attached to a long-term tenancy that lasted decades longer than anyone could have predicted. Maybe he began as security or a groundskeeper or a handyman whose loyalty earned him that space. Maybe he had a closer tie to the family than outsiders will ever know. The details are blurred, not because the story lacks importance, but because some lives at Graceland were never meant for the spotlight. What we can say with confidence is that he represented something bigger than one man's housing arrangement. His presence in the pool house was proof that Graceland, for all its branding and ticketing, still carried echoes of the way Elvis treated people he trusted. A promise made in a simpler time managed to survive layers of corporate restructuring, ownership changes, and legal storms. It only ended when the pressures of the modern world, security, liability, the need to audit every line, finally caught up with a handshake from the past. After John leaves, Graceland does not stop. The tours continue. The gates open each morning. Riley's legal battles ensure that foreclosure schemes and fraudulent claims are pushed back, and the estate remains in the family's hands. Fans still cry at the meditation garden, still whisper in the hallways, still feel as if they are stepping into Elvis's world for the first time. Yet something subtle has shifted. With the pool house dark, there's no longer a private, unseen life unfolding at the edge of the property. Every inch of the grounds now belongs either to the public story or to private family spaces behind heavier, more guarded doors. In a way, John's departure marks the closing of a bridge between eras. The man who lived quietly beside the pool carried the memory of a time when orders were given face to face, when gratitude sounded like, "You stay as long as you need to?" When the estate ran more on trust than on legal language, his eviction does not mean that the people now running Graceland care less. It means the world around them has changed so much that even old promises have to pass through lawyers' hands. The house on the hill remains, but one of its last living ghosts has been asked to step outside the gates. In the end, the question, who was living in Elvis's pool house, becomes less about a name and more about what it means to belong to a place like Graceland. John Doe was a reminder that legends are built not only on songs and fame, but on the unseen people who lock doors, fix pipes, and walk the perimeter long after the cameras are gone. His years in that small building tell us that Elvis's home was still a home for someone, even as the world lined up to buy a ticket to see it. If you stayed with this story to the end, you are not just visiting Graceland, you are looking for the people hidden in its shadows. Do you think the estate was right to end John Doe's time there, or should the promise have stood? Share your thoughts and subscribe for more untold Elvis stories.